I'm going to give people a couple minutes to come in. And we'll start in a minute or two. Let me see here. There we go.
She's looking for Emily. Can't see Emily.
I'm from Virginia. I am new to you. I've never met you, but I've met Jill many, many times.
I am Lily. All right. Well, you know what? It's 8:35, so I think I'm going to go ahead and take the lead and get this started so that we have enough time to talk this evening. So thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Thank you for coming to the roundtable discussion with deaf and hard of hearing adults. For this presentation, we ask that you turn off your videos and mute your microphones. And the only people that you should see on your screen are going to be the 5 panelists that we have this evening and also the interpreters. For those of you that are using remote conference captioning, we have a captioner with Hamilton Relay. I believe her name is Abby. And all you have to do is at the bottom of your screen is click on the CC button and you should be able to see the captions. We also have 2 interpreters with us this evening. Paulina and Rachel will be interpreting. They are with Civic Access, and we hope to see Paulina again. Is she still here, or maybe she turned her video off? Yeah, okay, perfect. All right, let me introduce myself. My name is Jill Young, and I am on the board of Virginia Hands and Voices. I am the communication chair, so I run the Facebook page, and I will be your moderator this evening, and I will also be one of the panelists. Let me see, we see that we have a lot of names here tonight, and I know some of you are new, and I just wanted to tell you a little bit about Virginia Hands and Voices. Hands and Voices is it's a national organization. It's a nonprofit organization that is run by parents of children with hearing loss. And we support parents who make decisions about what communication methods they need to pick for their child. And we say that whatever choice you make for your child is the right one for you. So having said that, there are basically 4 different types of communication methods that we're talking about this evening. One of them is listening and spoken language. It's often seen as LSL. LSL is used when only the auditory hearing is used to learn how to speak. So the residual hearing is what is used when you learn how to speak. In cued speech, you will see hand shapes and cues that surround the face that help you distinguish between words or even sounds that can look alike or sound alike. So it is both a visual and auditory method of communicating. American Sign Language is also known as ASL. It can be used exclusively as a visual language. Usually you do not use any residual hearing to be able to hear and understand ASL. And the fourth one is total communication, which is a sign language and a spoken language that are used simultaneously. So that's generally, when we talk about the methods, that's generally what we're kind of leaning towards. Our goal this evening is to introduce you to a variety of deaf and hard of hearing adults who have used one or more of those communication methods. We have this evening Reba Poole, Emily Mulholland, Eric Nordloff, Eric Rath, and myself. We originally had Lauren Good on this panel, but she could not attend because she had a family emergency come up. So what I'll do is kind of see if I can get this started. At the end, if we have some time, I will see if I can open it up to any questions that can come from you all. And if you want to, you are more than welcome to use the chat box at the bottom of your screen to type in any questions that come up. And if any panelists see these questions, we can try to answer them while we're talking. And if we don't see them, we will try to address it at the end. Okay. All right. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to have each of us introduce ourselves. And I want you to, whatever you're comfortable with, tell us how you lost your hearing. And, you know, when you were identified with hearing loss, and what method you used when you were growing up. And then also what method you use today, whether that is the same or different as the one that you grew up with. And I don't mind starting. I'll start and then I'll just pick somebody to up. So I'm going to tell you, I am Jill, and I used LSL growing up. I was listening in spoken language. I developed hearing loss when I was 1 due to meningitis. And I was 2 before my parents realized that I had hearing loss. So today I am a pediatric audiologist, and I use a cochlear implant in one ear, and I have a cross hearing aid in the other ear. And I consider myself more of a total communication user today. And I'll just go to Reba because you're the first person on my screen.
I'm going to pin you. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Amen.
Okay, so I'm Reba Poole. I have a deaf family. We're generationally deaf for many years. Back, my parents are deaf. My grandparents are deaf. My mom's side, and my grandmother married a hearing man, and his parents were deaf. So we just have always used the same language growing up. We were all completely deaf. We all went to deaf schools. Like I went to the Virginia School for the Deaf and Blind. I went to Gallaudet for college. I was completely in the deaf world, immersed in the deaf world. My mom decided that, you know, we would go to a hearing church. And so that was a challenge for us. I was the only deaf person in this classroom. And so I had to accept and learn how to work in that world. And I felt kind of isolated in that scenario, but I learned to accept what it was like to be in a hearing world, and I got better over time, and I grew up, and then I got used to being around hearing people, and I thank my mom for teaching me. I am not skilled at using my voice on account of being deaf, and my family doesn't. My dad is very, very deaf. Really, no one in our family uses spoken English at all. We've passed our language down and the use of our language down for generations. I went to Gallaudet, as I said, and but sometimes when I was in a hearing classroom, I would be frustrated because communication would be difficult, and I felt a bit isolated, and I would read books, and sometimes I didn't understand what, there was miscommunication, and especially like when we would go to this church situation. But when I was at the deaf school, that was a much more empowering situation to be in, as far as having access to communication. And I didn't really mainstream in school, but I went to like a special sort of class in order to like work on speech. And but I failed that. That didn't really work for me. So I learned, I learned well. So I had that stint out of the deaf school, but ended up ultimately going back to the deaf school. And I did have to learn how to join the hearing community and what that was like. And I used to be very passive, but now I'm more assertive in using language, and so I've gotten so that's kind of me. I don't know if I answered all the questions. I'm open to any questions that anyone might have. Or
Thank you, Reba. I just basically want to do a quick introduction right now, so we'll get to some questions in a minute. Let's move to Emily.
Hi, my name is Emily Mulholland, and I'm a acute speech user. I do know how to sign and use spoken language as well. I am profoundly deaf and have cochlear implants. I got them 10 years ago. I was born with a mild to moderate hearing loss, and it was progressive, and it is also genetic in my family. So half my family has a hearing loss and the other half does not. And I have cousins, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews that have hearing losses as well. But we are all different levels, and we all progress at different rates. I was the first one who was born with the hearing loss in place already. And I have a son. I have 3 children, one who is also profoundly deaf, and she was born with a profound hearing loss as well. So it's a very strong gene in my family, but it's still a 50-50 chance with every person who is born, whether they will have a hearing loss or not. I started off being oral until I was in 7th grade, when my hearing loss got worse and classrooms got bigger and harder to understand teachers and student discussions. And we happened to learn cute speech the summer before because my mom met a family who used it. So we learned that summer and got cute speech set up in the school for me and my sister, who is also deaf. And I have been using a combination of cute speech and spoken language ever since. Even today, I use cute speech transliterators in big in-person meetings, just so I don't miss any information. And I currently work as an early interventionist for parents who have a child with a hearing loss.
Thank you, Emily. How about Eric Nordloff?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So hi, I'm Eric Nordloff, and I was born in Chicago, and I was born hearing. I lost my hearing to bacterial meningitis when I was 2 years old. And my parents and I moved to St. Louis, Missouri, where I went to Central Institute for the Deaf, where it's an oral deaf education. So I grew up speaking and I mainstreamed in 3rd grade. In middle school and high school, I attended a deaf teen club in St. Louis, and that's where I learned sign language. So I would say I've continued to speak all my life, but I've complemented that with sign language. And I've lived in Virginia for the past 11 years, and I've been involved with both, the signing and speaking deaf communities. Oh, so I have one cochlear implant. It's a partial implant, and so I don't have full hearing in that particular implant.
Well, thank you, Eric Northlaff. If you guys didn't realize, we have 2 Erics tonight. So you're going to hear me say Eric Northlaff and Eric Raff. And as weird as it is, it's just so that they both know who I'm talking about when the interpreter signs their name. So, all right, let's ask Eric Raff. What do you want to share with us?
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Eric Raff. I was born deaf. I'm not sure when I was diagnosed exactly. Maybe it's neurofibrosis, NF, that could be the cause, either type 1 or type 2. Because my parents thought that I had neurofibrosis. But when I got my brain scan, they found that there was no sign of that. So my parents were like, so there's no neurofibrosis. So ever since then, we still don't know the cause. I was born during the rubella generation, but I did not experience that myself. In the past, they would call it the oral approach. Now they say ALSL. So that was what I was taught growing up, relying on listening and speaking. I used hearing aids at that time. And then I entered Gallaudet University and my entire world changed. I became immersed within the deaf community. I was able to learn, and then I slowly shifted to total communication, where I was using my voice as well as sign language, because my peers had a similar background as well. They grew up orally and then learned sign later. And then upon graduation, I went back home to Kentucky. And then I really got involved with the grassroots deaf community there. And that's when I became fully immersed in ASL. And now I typically use sign language, but I will code switch depending on who I'm talking to at the time. If they're a deaf person with an oral background, I may use more of a total communication type of approach versus signing with someone who is more fluent. Then I'll match their language as well. So it really depends on who I'm communicating with. With my hearing basso, I do tend to use English, spoken English, but I always have an interpreter. Because even though I may be able to speak, a lot of hearing people misunderstand and assume that means I can hear as well, but no, I'm still deaf. So I stopped using my hearing aids about 10 years ago. I have a very rare condition. It's called noise-triggered confusion. Sorry, noise-induced confusion. Vertigo, noise-induced vertigo is the interpreter jumping ahead. So when using my hearing aids, that would cause me to feel very dizzy. And then once I removed them, I was fine. Then I noticed when I put them back on, I would be dizzy again. So I went to the ear, nose, and throat doctor. And then they told me that my only solution was to get a cochlear implant. But I realized that the noise was what was triggering my dizziness. So then I decided just not to use my hearing aids from then on out. So I haven't used hearing aids or cochlear implants or anything of that nature. I just sign and, depend on technology.
Thank you, Eric. Okay, so let me start off by asking a question, and any of you panelists that would like to answer it, you can just jump in. What age did you realize that you first had a hearing loss? How old were you when you realized you had a hearing loss? Not when your parents found out you had a hearing loss. When did you realize that you couldn't hear the same? Anybody? Okay, Eric Rath.
Well, I mean, since I was born, I've been deaf. I'm fully deaf. I can't hear anything. So I really just depend on vibrations, and that's all. I know others may have been born hearing and like lost their hearing over time. However, I was born completely deaf, so I hear nothing.
Eric Rath.
It's hard to say exactly when, but I did notice when I was pretty young, I would say maybe 4 or 5. I would socialize with other kids, other hearing children. And I think that's when I started to realize, maybe I'm different. Because, I couldn't hear what they were saying. I have a feeling this was around anywhere between 4 and 6, that age range. It's hard to pinpoint exactly where, but I was definitely young. That's when I realized I hear.
I picked the same age, right around preschool. And I picked it because I had an older brother and a younger brother with normal hearing. And my older brother was only a year older than me. And I realized that he didn't have to go to the same class that I had to go to when he was in preschool and kindergarten. So I realized about that time that I was getting some special services that he didn't have to have.
I'll share my thought. I think it's a hard question to answer, and I don't think I have a direct answer, but I think that when I mainstreamed in 3rd grade, there was a trial period where I went to a private school before I mainstreamed into a local public school. So I think that probably exposed me to hearing peers, whereas I think at CID, it was probably a very accommodating environment in terms of how teachers knew how to talk to me and how my peers and I could talk with each other. So I think mainstream environment is where I became more conscious of my hearing loss in that particular environment.
For me, I think it was the first real realization was probably in 4th grade when I had moved from one elementary school to another because I had all new people and new friends. And I struggled a little more in the classroom because it was also my first male teacher. And I have more trouble with male voices. And I recognized that my peers were wondering why I didn't catch what the teacher said or asking all the time, oh, what page are we on? Because I missed the number and such. But the first time I think I realized like, oh, I am deaf without my hearing aids. Like this is really there is probably in middle school. Like I said, when my hearing got worse and I had a harder time in bigger classrooms and had to rely or just needed more visual input to be able to understand what was going on. And that was when I felt like I really recognized what I needed to succeed.
Can any of you tell us about a time where your parent had to advocate for you in an educational setting?
I can share. So when I mainstreamed, I don't recall I used FM unit in elementary school, and that was kind of a whole hassle because I kept sending it back and getting it back, and it still would not work. But I think in middle school, I started using CART a captioning assistant, but I had a hard time getting it for every classroom because special school district in my area was not familiar with it. It was a little bit costly and they were trying to encourage me to use an interpreter, but I did not know sign language at the time. And I was also a heavy reader, so I had to demonstrate to, I guess, the IEP people that that was the case. That was a big reader that could keep up with log transcription. So my parent and I worked together to practice my advocating personally in front of them. And with that, I was able to get card all the way through middle school and high school. And thankfully in college, it wasn't as much of a chore to get.
Emily?
Yes, the biggest one I can think of for my parents is we had to switch from being oral to using cute speech transliterators. I'm actually from a small town in Utah, is where I grew up. So the idea of cute speech was brand new because we were the first family in the whole state to utilize it in a school setting. So it was a big fight to get the teachers and administrators to understand that my needs had changed enough that I needed something else. And this is what we chose and what we were going to use. I also had my mom and dad help me in driver's ed because the driver's ed teacher felt that deaf people shouldn't be able to drive. So we had to fight a lot with that. And even though I should have passed the test, he failed me and I ended up having to take it from the state instead of through the school because of that. But that went like all the way up to the superintendent, and it was a tough battle to say, no, I can drive. It shouldn't be a problem. So there's been lots of little battles here and there because we were in a small town that didn't know much about deaf and hard of hearing education, let alone cute speech as well.
My mom also had to pave the way for me because I grew up in a really small town in Iowa, and they had never had anybody like me go through their system before. So I remember it was a lot of hard work. But one thing that I remember in particular was I had to go to meet with a therapist like once a week. There was a lady that would come to the school, and she was an oral rehabilitation therapist. She was basically teaching me how to listen. And I remember whenever I had to see her, they would pull me out during specials because they didn't want me to miss science or math or some really important subjects. And it was so devastating to me because specials was my favorite part of the day. It was art, it was music, it was PE. And I remember one day just crying and being really upset because I was missing specials again. And my mom came into the school and she had to fight for them to give that to me because I needed it. And so, yes, science was important, but I needed to be happy. So that was really something sweet that I just remember that she did. Okay. Tell us, do you have any positive, negative social experience that you want to share and how you learned from it? Eric, Raph?
I was gonna try to pin him. Trying to pin you, but it's not allowing me. Let me see if I can drag it. Okay.
Okay.
I'll try to see. It's small.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Rachel.
Yeah, my parents sort of
Rachel?
education. I grew up in the 70s And
Hey, Rachel, I don't know if it's just me,
or
but you're
act-
cutting in and out.
demonstrate-
Is it just me? Oh, sorry. Sorry, Eric.
I can,
Sorry. Yes. I thought you were cutting in and out for a minute there. But let's try this again. Eric, Beth, you can go ahead and try again. Yes.
Sorry about that. So let's see. So, you know, I grew up in the 70s, like I said, and IDEA had just been passed, and we had these new regulations, and my parents weren't quite sure like what that meant. They didn't really have all the resources. It wasn't an interpreter. I didn't have an FM system. We didn't have these kind of things available, and my mom would go every year. She would meet with every single one of my teachers and review the coursework, explain to the teachers, arrange a place for where I would be sitting at the front of the class, so that way I could see the teacher and see her face, to be able to read the lips of the teacher. And it was a wonderful experience to have my mom advocate for me and provide that access for me. I didn't like having to sit at the front of the class. I wanted to sit at the back of the class, but that's the way it was. So, you know, I had to see the teacher's face so I could read their lips, and that way I could see the board, the blackboard, and see what. But when the teacher would look to the blackboard and write and talk without looking at me, honestly, I didn't know what they were saying. So I had to really advocate for myself about those needs. And you know, I daydreamed in class a lot. I didn't really pay attention. I'd pass notes to other kids and write notes when I was supposed to be paying attention. But that's kind of my experience. And I learned through reading, basically. And so I would say that was my experience. You know, everyone else was hearing in the classroom. My parents, especially my mom, was a real advocate for me. And looking back on that, especially for high school, there was a lot of frustration for me. Um, um, there weren't enough resources, and there was carbon paper, so that way I could get a note taker to take notes, and then they could give me the other copy. That was really helpful. So a student would write the notes, but unfortunately I always got a lousy note taker. So then we tried recording to see if that would work. And then that recording would be given, I would take that home to my mom, and then my mom or my sister would listen to the 2-hour or 3-hour recording and then take notes for me. And they would do this every night for me and give me those notes. And then I would read those notes the next morning in school. So that's how I got through high school, in some of those methods, kind of an old-fashioned approach to making it through school. But I think, you know, many thanks to my mom and my sister for helping me through that time period.
Reba.
Yeah, I get it. Mine was a little bit different of an experience, coming from a deaf school. You know, growing up in that situation, very different. So some things are similar that you're talking about, but sometimes we would get a teacher that didn't sign very well, or just use home sign communication. And they were supposed to have teachers that were able to sign, but occasionally, you know, that wasn't the case, and that was difficult. I would miss what they were saying. I wouldn't know, and I would get upset about it, and I'd be like, where, you know, what is going on? And so sometimes the teacher, so I remember that at that time. I think I went to an oral class, and I didn't really understand what was going on at all. You know, I came from a really strong deaf family where everyone at home could sign and use any speech. So I didn't really, that was really difficult for me. So, you know, speech was something that I didn't really connect with at all. And even though I went to this class, they tried to teach me and I tried to learn, but I finally had to give up. And it, you know, it didn't, I was so frustrated. It didn't work for me in that situation. But now, you know, I think about teachers. I think, you know, I'm not sure if how it is now with some teachers. I think a lot of them, I didn't understand a lot of teachers that were trying to use speech, but sign was always the better way for me. And some couldn't sign and they would, you know, like point to stuff a lot and direct in that way, kind of sort of an aggressive sort of way. But speech reading was very difficult, but it was part of that world back then. And I think it's a lot better now. At my time period, it was, you know, it was a different time period than it is now. I think there's a lot more resources now.
So let's, did any of you change your views about being deaf or hard of hearing as a child transitioning into an adult? Did any of you change how you viewed yourself? Yes, Eric, Nordloff.
So growing up, speaking and going to an oral deaf school, I think I grew up with the mentality that speaking was better than signing, and it took being part of the Deaf Teen Club in St. Louis to be exposed to other deaf people and to become friends with them to make me realize that was not a healthy mentality. And that's why I learned sign language, and that's why the things that I do today are an effort to bridge that so-called gap. Like in the DC area, I advocate for open caption movies because I know deaf people of all backgrounds benefit from that kind of thing. So that's an example of how I've evolved since my childhood.
Emily?
Pretty similar as well. I remember when I first got my first job at 14, working at the courthouse as an assistant. They were asking about my hearing loss, and I was like, no, I'm not deaf. I'm not hard of hearing. I'm fine. I don't need anything, because I didn't want a label. But shifting to an adult after I got out of my rough teenage years, because it was just rough, I learned that it's fine to have, it's good to have that identity, to be able to tell people, this is what I need, and I will do my job well, or I will do my best. But, you know, it's a two-way street. You want this, I also need help with this. And I also know sign language because a deaf girl moved to my town the same year I started using cute speech, and she was ASL only, no voice. We were the only 2 of the 3 children with the hearing loss in the whole school district that had a hearing loss. And so I became really good friends with her and learned to sign with her. And so now I try to adjust I code switch, like Eric N. Nordhoff, I think it was. I code switch to meet whoever I'm trying to communicate with. And I feel that was important. And once I learned that, early intervention told my mom a long time ago that she must do spoken language. If she does sign language, I will not learn to speak or read. I will always be behind, which we now know this is not true at all. There's research that shows that. And once I learned that and met many of my deaf friends in college and learned their parents were told similar things, or people didn't know about cute speech or what, I felt strongly parents needed to know more information and have the ability to choose for themselves what they think might work. And if they find it doesn't, they need the support to be able to find what does work. we don't know what will or won't work until we try something. But once we see if it's not working, it's okay to make the changes to make it work. And so that's part of why I became an early interventionist, because I felt parents were often told, you must do this, 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 and this, or your child will fail, basically. And that's not okay to do. So yes, it's shifted
Like
a
that.
lot.
No, that's great advice. I think our parents need to hear that. That's great advice. Do you guys have anything to add? What else do you wish parents knew?
I think Reba had a
Oh.
question.
Oh, Reba?
Yeah, I have a question, Emily. I'm just curious. I don't know much about cute speech or that kind of thing. So are you speaking? So did the cute speech help you learn to be able to talk better? Like that actually helped you be able to speak better? I'm just curious about that because I don't know much about that topic. But did that help you actually be able to articulate better?
Mm-hmm. So cute speech helped me to see more different sounds in there, but it doesn't teach me where to put my tongue to make a certain sound, or how to make how to do B and L together with my mouth. You need a speech therapist to do that, and support for that. Cute speech just helps you see all the consonant sounds and the vowel sounds, the basic ones, and not all the tricky little ways of how you say all those different sounds in there.
Great. That was a really good question, Reba. Thank you.
Yeah, this is one of the first times for me to see this actually being used in person. And so I just wanted to ask you because, yeah, this is fascinating.
Do any of you, Emily gave some great advice for parents. Do any of the rest of you have any advice that you would give out? Eric Nordloff, I see your hand going up.
Okay, so I typed up something actually, but I'll try to summarize it a little bit. So I think that if you are hearing parents, you will never 100% be in your deaf child's shoes, but worth making the effort to do that, because I know hearing parents have their own lives and they are so ingrained in predominantly hearing society, and how the fact that when you speak and heard, it's like a very easy two-way street. So for me, it helped for my parents to try to be aware of what environments work for me or how my interaction should go. Like, I think it helps if you can empower the child to figure out how to best deal with the environment, like picking the most quiet corner of a restaurant, or the right seat at the table, or perhaps if you're dealing with family members, there's a thing called dinner table syndrome, where a deaf person can be lost at a very big table of relatives. So try to think of ways to change that to where maybe there's smaller tables, or where a deaf child can hang out with a family member more one-on-one or something, so there can be a better connection. Because basically noise and group situations are going to be challenging for us, and I think parents should constantly try to be mindful of that, no matter where they go. Like, ask themselves, what would my child experience, and have a conversation with your child about that. And at the end of the day, sometimes we will be tired from having to interact with young people, so we'll need a break. So give us a break, please, sometimes.
Thank you, Eric. We have a couple of questions that showed up in the chat. Eric Raff, did you want to add something? Go ahead.
Yeah. I would just like to add 2 cardinal rules for parents to be aware of. Never tell a deaf child, oh, I'll tell you later. That's number 1. And never say, never mind. That's where deaf children can feel devalued, as if something's not important enough for me to know. Those are my 2 cardinal rules for any parent of deaf children. But saying yes, I agree completely. Yes, that is so true. I've seen the same things. I face the same things many times. I'll be like, "Hey, what did they say?" And they're like, "Oh, I'll tell you later. I'll tell you later." And then they never tell me. They'll forget about it or whatever the case may be. So they'll just be carrying on conversation, and then I'm never in the loop. They'll always say, "Oh, whenever we're done, I'll tell you later. Just wait, I'll tell you later." And then it never happens. But yeah, I agree with what you said. It's very true. It's very common, especially in group situations. It's the worst with all these conversations going on around you. You feel left out. You don't know what they're talking about. I prefer to be in a space where they're signing as well, and so we can all communicate better. Really, if you want to get deeply involved within the deaf community, learn how to sign. One of the best ways to get connected. Even though there are some deaf people that do use spoken language, sign language is always really helpful. And that way, if you know both, everyone in a conversation can understand what's going on, or get an interpreter, whatever you need to do. So that's the best, in my opinion.
Thank you, Reba. We have a couple of questions here in the chat that I was hoping we could take a few minutes to answer. The first one I can see is, what would you tell your young child self, knowing what you now know as an adult?
I would
Emily.
love to touch on that. I would tell my young self to not be afraid to tell people what I need. Self-advocacy is not being selfish. It's not, oh my gosh, inconveniencing other people. It's just telling people what I need to be able to be a part of the conversation. What I need to be able to say, hey, just like at a restaurant, can we not go to this restaurant? Can we try this one instead? Because the lighting sucks at the other one and I can't see you. Or the music is too loud at this one. Can we try this one instead? That's self-advocacy. And if I could tell my younger self and say, you know what, it's okay to tell a friend, yeah, I don't want to go swimming today because my hearing aids are not waterproof and it's going to be 10 people. I won't enjoy it with all hearing people who don't know how to cue or sign. Can we do something else instead? Or, you know what, don't be mad at me, but I just can't go because I won't have fun. So, but how about I do this instead? So that's what I would tell my younger self. And it's the second half of that question I saw was, what would you tell parents? I would say model that positive self-advocacy talk with your children so they can see it. It doesn't need to be behind the doors and you tell another mother and call and say, hey, my child has a hearing loss. They might need this at your house, but just model it for them and say, oh, Emily has a hearing loss and sometimes she needs to have you repeat it. So Emily, what do you say when you don't understand? Like, to show them that it's okay to tell people you need something to make it equitable.
That's great. I agree with that too. Because I think as I was growing up, I always felt a little bit ashamed sometimes that I had hearing loss because I grew up in a hearing family. And I didn't have any deaf cousins and sisters and brothers, you know. So I think in some ways, I would tell my younger self, it's okay. You're going to be okay. And I think that was kind of one of the things that I wanted to get across tonight was we all turned out okay, right? You know, despite how we grew up and the methods that we had to use when we were growing up to where we are today, you know, it's going to be okay. And I think for me, that's really important for new parents of kids with hearing loss to hear, because they just don't know. And I think, you know, all 5 of us being here tonight is a great example of that. Does anybody else have anything to add to that? Eric Raff?
Yes. I would tell my younger self two things. First, I would say be proud of your deafness. Don't be ashamed. It's part of your journey. I wish I knew that a long time ago when I was a kid, but don't be ashamed of yourself as a deaf person. Secondly, I would say that you're going to face a lot of struggles and barriers, so be ready to overcome those and fight for those and keep pushing. You'll always face struggles and barriers. You got to be ready. Figure out how to overcome those. So those would be the two things that I would tell my younger self. Because that's my own life journey. Been a lot of pitfalls along the way. I agree with that. Yes, exactly, Eric. So true. I agree.
Why don't we end with one more question here? And I'm going to tell the audience that if they have any other questions they want to ask, to see if they can put it into the chat box. I think that might be the easiest way for us to pick up any extra questions. And if you feel like you want to chime in from the audience and say something, feel free to put your hand up in the chat box too, and maybe we can see if we can unmute you and hear what you have to say. Okay. Let's see. So the last thing I was going to ask tonight is, do you have any tips or information that you wish professionals or your parents had when you were younger?
I'll share one thing. So I know that sometimes I say words as I see them in print and they're not going to come out the right way. So one frustration I have with my parents from time to time is when they correct what I'm saying in the middle of my sharing. And what I try to teach them is to kind of hold off on that until I finish sharing, because I think it feels like that's more important than what I'm actually wanting to share. So that's just something I want to put out there. Like you just save it for when I finish, or for when your deaf child finishes their thought.
Oh, I had a similar experience, Eric Raff said.
I see one question that popped up. Oh, actually a couple. Do your peers in school give you a hard time for being deaf? Did you feel like an outsider bullied? Anybody want to tackle that one? I mean, personally, for me, give me a second, Emily. You know, I did feel like an outsider. I don't think I was given a hard time for being deaf. I don't think I was bullied, but yeah, it is isolating when you go to a school and, you know, you have to sit at the front of the classroom and you have to use an FM system and you have to, you know, have an interpreter or whatever the situation is. It can feel a little bit isolating, but it all comes back to, you know, attitude and just building that strength to overcome adversity and being a survivor. And that's what I think of all of us, is we're just survivors. You know, we have just made our way through, and that's what I mean by we all just got where we are, and we've turned out okay. But yes, you know, in the spirit of being transparent, it is an isolating place to be sometimes. Emily?
I'll make it short. I was going to say with Eric, I have a rule with my husband that he can only correct me up to 3 times a day on a word I mispronounce, because I get frustrated in the same way that it makes me feel like I never can share what I want to share. He does wait until I finish my thought, but I have a rule: 3 times a day. It usually doesn't even end up being 3 times a day, but I have my limit of being corrected. And that's a personality thing, but also my own self-advocacy thing of, nope, don't like it, stop. And the other tip I was going to say is each child is an individual. So what works for one family doesn't mean it works for another. Even my sister and I are different enough that we had different needs, even though we both have a profound hearing loss and both use cute speech. We have different levels of how we use those services and such. So it's all individual, and you will learn along the way.
No, that's really great. Let's hit one more question. I'm sorry, I'm kind of looking at these here. Some of these questions we might be able to answer individually. There's two. There's one right here that I kind of like. Right here, if you have any hearing siblings, what do you want hearing siblings to do? I'm sorry, let me see if I can be. So did any of you have hearing siblings? What would you have them like to see from them to show that they understood? So let's tackle that one and then we'll close this up again.
I'm an only child, so I can't directly relate, but I do have a few friends who have siblings and they struggle the same way. So I would recommend the advice I gave parents to try to be in the child's shoes for hearing brothers and sisters, to be in their siblings' shoes and try to be, an ally, just to understand all the circumstances that might be difficult to a deaf child.
Thank you, Eric. Well, I think we are all out of time for this evening, and I want to wrap this up by thanking all of our panelists for being here tonight, and also to thank our audience for being here and for patiently watching all of us talk and listening to our stories. This was really great, and I hope that we can keep doing this in the future. So thank you all. And if you are interested in learning more about Virginia Hands and Voices, we do have a website. It is www.bahandsandvoices.com. And on that website, we do post a lot of events for parents of kids with hearing loss. So I can see it's in the chat box right now. Thank you, Terry. So thank you so much, all of you, Eric Nordloff, Eric Rath, Reba, and Emily. I really appreciate you guys for coming on tonight. Thank you to the interpreters and the captionists as well. So you all enjoy your week, and any question that we did not answer, we will see if we can collect them and get them answered directly to those people. Okay? Thank you all. Have a great night. I'm shaking because I'm cold. I think someone turned down the air conditioning during the meeting.
Do you want me to stay and interpret?
I think we're finished. Emily, thank you. It was great to see you. And it was nice to meet you, Reba. It's nice to meet you. And it was good to see you again, Eric.
Thanks, Jill.
You are welcome. You are welcome. All right, leaving.
Perfect.
So Reba. Oh, she found it. Okay, thank you,
Okay,
Terry.
You're welcome. I'm copying the chat. So
Okay, yeah,
I
let's
think-
get, oh, we're still recording.
oh,